The Creo lecture series, we've been doing this, well, we had one a number of years ago. It got put aside because of the pandemic, and we've just started it up again about a year ago. So, and we do these lectures periodically. This is going to be the final one for this season, but we will start up again probably in March. Maybe get one going over the winter. And the other thing I want to ask if volunteers or anybody, if you have any subjects, the subjects on these lectures are usually for the connected with Chimney Rock, ancestral Pueblo and Chaco, and etc., Native Americans. And if anybody has any subject that they think that would make a good for a speaker or something, please let me know, all right? Okay, and I want to give a shout out to LPEA, who we got a grant from them to help put on these lecture series. And the other thing I want to mention here right now is Kim Malville has donated several of his books from Machu Picchu. They are up there. We're asking for a $10 donation for anybody that wants them. Okay? I think there's 12 or 13 of them up there. All right, tonight's lecture is Exploring Astronomy and Culture in Chimney Rock by J. McKim Malville. He will cover what we have learned about astronomy and culture at Chimney Rock since his crew back in August 8th, 1988, right?
8888.
All eight. His crew was the first. He figured it out, and his crew was the first ones to see the moonrise between the pillars in about 900 years or so.
Eric and I thought that at the end of this season of lunar standstills, and the third lunar standstill that I've experienced, it would be fun to explore what we've learned, how we benefit, how much we've enjoyed these lunar standstills. Okay, next one. So this is the slide that started it all off. August 8th, 1988, when I was running a field school for the University of Colorado and Fort Lewis at a place called Yellow Jacket, north of Cortez. And we had I had a bunch of students with me. Frank Eddy, who was the archaeologist who had excavated Chimney Rock in 1970, had suggested that Chimney Rock was the best place to build an observatory. And he was really the one who introduced Chimney Rock to me. I'd been working at Yellow Jacket and Mesa Verde, so it was his encouragement that brought me up to Chimney Rock on summer solstice of 1988, anticipating seeing the sun rise between the double chimneys, which they did, of course. And I spent the summer with my students trying to figure out what went wrong, and eventually figured it was the major lunar standstill that would fit between the chimneys. August 1988 was the end of that season of standstills, and so we just barely sneaked in. So this picture the picture on the lower right was the very first picture, just a single snapshot, and the one on the left is a time exposure showing the movement of the moon behind the chimney. For 14, 15 years, this is the only photograph of the moonrise between the chimneys, and unfortunately the laws of Newton worked, and the moon reappeared in 2004. At one time, I thought that this was the first time that a human being had ever photographed a major lunar standstill. And it turned out I'd been beaten by 1 year. A place called Collinash in northern Scotland, Isle of Lewis, has a series of rocks that are in line with the major lunar standstill. And someone had taken a photograph 1 year earlier of that to beat me. And I'll show that picture to you at the end. So this started it all off. I don't know if anyone else would have been so crazy and mad as to pursue the possibility of detecting the moon rising between the chimneys, but it has produced a great bounty for the last 37 years. It's amazing. Next slide. So here is a picture of Kalash, and it is a completely different situation from Chimney Rock. It's probably 2500 BC. No one knows anything about the local customs. No one knows anything about where to stand and where the alignment is. But anyhow, the moon at lunar standstill at this time is very, very close to the horizon. It just skims its way along the horizon, moving behind each one of these standing stones. Not any one single standing stone, so there isn't a real alignment, but there is a very interesting event. Anyhow, I give my credit to a fellow by the name of Poulter, who took this photograph. Elsewhere, this is the first photograph of lunar standstill in the Americas, so we have some credit. Next slide, please. So here is the first publication on Chimney Rock by Frank Eddy. He had spent the summer of 1971 excavating the site after it had been abandoned by Jensen, who had first excavated it in 1921. And Jensen did several things that were really bad. He found all sorts of wood beams on roofs of buildings and burned them. I don't think they roasted marshmallows, but they kept themselves warm, I suppose. But anyhow, it was a major destruction of archaeological data that was very unfortunate. So that was one bad thing. The other bad thing was that he didn't backfill the site. So from 21 to 70, it was just they were exposed to the dangers of the weather. And so Frank and his team re-excavated part of the site, and his publication is really the beginning of the whole story of archaeology at Chimney Rock. Next slide. So his idea of which he develops in this paper, in this booklet, is that Chimney Rock was the result of colonization. And that sort of means unfriendly takeover by masons and architects and priests from Chaco coming up to Chimney Rock and building the great house. And he identifies these colonists as male, because of course you know that women don't know how to be architects or masons or priests. I'm being facetious there, of course. And he argued that because the ceramics were unusual, that they could not have been made by women who had background in ceramics in the canyon. So he concludes that only men migrated up to Chaco, migrated up to Chimney Rock, and built the great house in 1076. And as I shall point out to you, he was wrong about both of them. Next slide. So here's the first paper that we published on our discovery of the moon rising between the chimneys. The author, I shared the authorship with Frank Eddy, not because he did any work on it, but because he inspired me to encourage me to come up there. Carol Ambrewster was a fellow astronomer, and it was with Carol and several students that we first saw the moon coming up between the chimneys, almost having had, I mentioned, told you, some of you, almost having had a revolt on my hands as the students said Malville doesn't know how to calculate when the moon comes up. It's not going to happen, and eventually did it at 1:30 in the morning. Next slide. So, 1990, just 2 years later, Gary Matlock, who is the forest archaeologist, organized a conference on Chimney Rock, and he created this lovely cover, which you can see has, in one way, both the sun and the moon. But anyhow, much of this conference was influenced by our discovery of the moon, the connection between the moon and the chimneys. Next slide is another one of these tables of content. Jim Judge, who is a professor of Fort Lewis, major figure in Western and Southwestern archaeology, played a large role in trying to understand why Chimney Rock became a great house state, how it became a so-called Chaco outlier. It's interesting that most of the people who were speakers at the conference were archaeologists. Only a couple of us were astronomers, and so it was very, very nice to see this whole tradition of exploration and investigation of Chimney Rock started with well founded in archaeology. Next slide. So Judge was very nice about commenting about the Chimney Rock in contrast to what Franchetti had suggested. It was built by the residents of Chimney Rock area, built their own Chacoan structures to mimic the archaeological style of the Central Canyon and to participate actively in their rituals, but they were not subservient to or slaves to Chaco itself. Namely, the outlier was merely a community, or mostly a community, that was impressed by Chaco and used their masons to build the great house, but they were not dominated by the elites living in the great houses of Chaco. The next slide is Alan Kane, another Forest Service archaeologist, and his suggestion was that the great house was built because it was a timber town. It was a lumber town where ponderosa pine were readily accessible, and they could be tied into rafts, floated down the Piedra, and then onto the San Juan River to Salmon, where there is the Great North Road, which they could be. That's another problem of carrying these logs down the Great North Road. But that Chimney Rock had been designed by the residents of Chaco as a lumber town to help to provide the timber for building the great houses, which of course has been a long puzzle as to where those logs came from. Next slide. Jeannie Mobley Tanaka was sort of an outlier herself. She said, well, there's nothing Chaco about this place at all. It's a very complex community. It contains three types of residences, as you probably already know. That on the upper mesa, which is the great house, the lower mesa, which are these so-called these what are they called?
Pit houses.
Pit houses.
Crater houses.
Crater mounds.
Crater mounds, not a very good term for it, but and then down below on the terraces above the Piedra River, there are another community, much larger, in fact, which is probably the major community in the area of houses built mostly of cobbles, because they were so much still available. So 3 different architectural styles, 3 different kinds of structural material, and her argument was that this was just normal. Here is a community with a spread in altitude, spread in ecological areas, and nothing Chacoan at all about it, except of course they used Chaco style to build the great house. Next slide. Anyhow, that's what she said. Great house does not represent a intrusion of Chacoans, and they have served as an integrative center for this whole community. And she was really spot on in terms of this interpretation of Chimney Rock. Next slide. So here are, as you all know, the Chimney Rock community and the idea that people could come up from Chaco and take over Chimney Rock is rather crazy when you understand that there's more to Chimney Rock than just the Upper Mesa. There's no evidence, for example, in North Piedra site, which is the largest of the communities, as we know now, that Chaco had any particular influence there at all. For them to make massive changes in this area, they would have had to treat all these levels, and they didn't. So next slide. So here is, you probably know this already, this is the population of the various communities that we have in the Chimney Rock area, and the North Piedra, as you can see, is by far the center, the major community of the area. Chimney Rock may have been a seasonal outlying community to which people visited because they wanted to get close to the rock towers, because the rock towers had a sacred quality to them, and they were maybe just there during the summer. They were there for collecting timber, but anyhow, it was not probably not a year-round site for occupation. Next slide. So we also had Dave Wilcox, who was another archaeologist who was a little bit on the mad side. He believed that the area was dominated by the Chaco elites, who were very powerful and very dangerous. And if you, of course, strayed from the path, they might kill you because of all the evidence, some evidence of cannibalism in the area. And he proposed that Chimney Rock had been conquered by a rapid strike. He suggested there was a rapid strike force that had been established by the leaders of the great houses that could move very rapidly along the wide roads to keep the whole community together. I think this was published because he was a very highly regarded archaeologist who was saying something very crazy, and he deserved to be heard. But obviously, this has not stuck at all as an interpretation. Next slide. And then my paper in that was just simply an obvious one, if you know me, that it was a place for people to celebrate and to observe the rising of the moon between these very special rocks, which perhaps were part of the ancestral Pueblo traditions, possibly a hierophany. You probably know that word. Hierophany is developed by a religious historian by the name of Verde, and really refers to the breakthrough of the sacred into the mundane world. And or hierophanies, as Verde describes it, are something that you really, your heart begins to flutter once you see something really amazing, which is the sacred breaking through into the world. And we also feel that trade, it was a trade center besides being a pilgrimage center. We have evidence that it was a pilgrimage center from these feather holders or plume holders that we have both in Chimney Rock, but also two of them found in 2 rooms in Pueblo Bonito and in Molos ruins. So we know that people traveled from those 2 places up to Chimney Rock to participate in some kind of festival or ceremony and carried these artifacts back as a memento. Traders are always at major religious festivals or pilgrimage festivals there because people are there, they can sell stuff to them. And so the idea that Chimney Rock was both a pilgrimage center and a trading center makes a lot of sense looking at other similar situations around the world, especially like in India. Next slide. So then we had a second conference a few years later at the Heritage Center in connection with the Pecos Conference. Next slide is the cover of the book is a picture that maybe some of you recognize. This is from Peterson Ridge. This is the sun at close to equinox rising between the two towers. My impression of this house, 5AA8, is that it was an intrusion itself. It was probably built by the people living at the High Mesa because it's the same slab architecture. The residents of Peterson Ridge built houses that are quite different from those of Chimney Rock. They are typical unit pueblos with room blocks in the north and surrounding a kiva in the middle, with a north-south orientation. This great house, 5AA8, is oriented towards the sun at the time of equinox, towards the towers. I first went up there with an archaeologist there in Matlock, and in 1989, and one had a hard time avoiding walking on shirts. It was just, the ground just crunched. Now, probably because of our fault, people have been walking up there and picking up shirts. Next slide. So here is a breakdown of that conference. I want to pick out several of the people. Next slide. Who gave talks. One of them was Mary Sullivan, who turned out to be she was in the anthropology department, but she was a student of mine, and I funded her research. She studied these plume holders or feather holders, which seem to be were found on some altars, Hopi altars. We don't know very much about them, but they apparently have to do with sacred activities, sacred ceremonies. There are something like 16, 18 feather holders that are known. Majority of them are found in Chimney Rock. Most interesting, 2 of them are from Pueblo Bonito, 2 of them are from Wallace, really indicating a movement of people carrying these plume holders down after having visited Chimney Rock on a pilgrimage, perhaps. Next slide. And then Doug Parker. Doug Parker, another graduate student in anthropology whom I funded, and he studied the crystallography of the ceramics, and discovered that this hatch mangoes, black on white. There are 2 types of them that were found on Chimney Rock, and the upper one with hatch lines were unique to Chimney Rock, and he calls it a Chimney Rock mangoes black on white. The incredible thing about these is they contain trachyte, which is a temper that is used to when you're heating the ceramic. It keeps from cracking. Trachyte, as you probably know, comes from the Triscuits, and it is found in ceramics from Chaco Canyon. So what this means is that people from Chaco carried these ceramic bowls or whatever they were up to Chimney Rock, up to the Great House, and broke them ceremonially, probably, and crushed the sherds and ground them such that they were used for temper in the ceramics that they made at Chimney Rock itself. So a rather striking example of sacred items, valuable items being carried from Chimney Rock, and we carried to Chimney Rock from Chaco Canyon. Next slide. This is mine. This was a diagram which I showed in that copy of the book, which I found very intriguing. Namely, if you look at the stone, if you're at the stone basin in the stone circle, and you look at the Great House is not square, rectangular, aside from the circular structures of great houses. All great houses are sort of rectangular. They're not trapezoidal. This is, I think, the only example of a really distinctly trapezoidal great house. One wall, the south wall, is lined up with the sight lines of the torus to the supernova, which appeared in 1054 and was visible for nearly 2 years. And the other side lines up with summer solstice sunrise. Really very puzzling and nicely unique. And this leads us into a discussion of what was the supernova doing up there and how did it influence people's lives. Next slide. So the third conference was held in 2011 in April. And I guess one take of this is that we need more. We need another. There's time for another conference on Chimney Rock. And I hope maybe the Forest Service can encourage you, can organize something like that. But anyhow, we had there was a paper read by Wendy Sutton. Maybe some of you know Wendy. She was a forest archaeologist at Chimney Rock for a number of years, has a PhD. She read a paper by Marcia Truell. Marcia, if you have been wandering around Chaco Canyon very much, you know there's a place called Marcia's Rincon. And she had done a lot of excavation, and the Rincon was named after a living person. So Marcia is very famous. But anyhow, Marcia was present at the time that Frank Eddy was excavating the East Kiva of the Great House, and he excavated down to what he thought was the lowest of two ventilator shafts, and pulled out a beam, which then was dated to be 1076. Marcia was there at that time, and says she said, Dr. Eddy, Frank, she said, that's not the lower ventilator, that's the upper ventilator. And she was only a graduate student at that time and didn't pursue the matter any further. So the date 1076 has stood because it was the lower ventilator shaft. We'll look at that diagram in a minute. That would date the structure of the Great House. So one major change that we've been able to identify is that 1076 is not the date of construction of the Great House, but it was earlier than that. If it was earlier by a lunar standstill cycle, that would get it back to 1054, 1056, the time of the next lunar standstill, or the great supernova of 1054. For me, this has sort of been a learning experience. Frank Eddy was a very close friend of mine. As I say, he encouraged me to come up to Chimney Rock in the first place. When I was working first in 1988, we camped with him at the Rafter T Ranch. A couple of years later, he was approached by Fred Wendorf, who was a major archaeologist who was working in Egypt, and Fred had discovered some rocks, some megaliths in a dried lake in southern Egypt on the western desert, and couldn't figure out why they were aligned as they were. And so Fred Wendorf asked Frank, did he know an astronomer who might come out and help him? This is a personal story. I hope you don't mind my sharing it with you. But anyhow, so Frank was responsible for my going out to southern Egypt and discovering, as it were, the oldest astronomical site in the world, in the southern Egyptian desert. So I'm very, very indebted to Frank, but he made a mistake. I discussed this situation with Marcia last year, and she says, please don't tell this story. I don't want this to be a he said, she said argument. Frank is not around. I just don't want to be embroiled in some nasty, contentious situations. And a year later, this year, I've been thinking about that, and what is science? It is a self-correcting situation. Errors have to be identified and corrected. That's the essence of science. And even though we like and love Frank Eddy, we've got to admit that he made a mistake. And the date for the construction of East Kiva, or the Great House, first construction, is not 1076, but earlier, which is really quite interesting. What happened in that period of time between the construction of the remodeling of the East Kiva at its first construction. And that takes us, as I say, back to a very interesting time when there was a supernova in the sky. Next slide. So here is the details of the East Kiva. These are photographs from Jensen's work. Unfortunately, Frank did not photographically document what he had been doing. But here is the ventilator. Can I wander? Yes. Here are the two ventilator shafts. The Kiva had been built on irregular sloping bedrock, as though it had been rapidly built, which makes sense if people had been startled by the supernova. Brilliant, the third brightest object in the sky next to the sun and moon, appearing suddenly in July of 1054. Our suggestion is that the alignment of the Kiva to the supernova, which turned out to be very precise, really is a proof that they observed the supernova and built something that was a shrine or a monument to that object. The other unique thing about it is that all the other observations or reports of this supernova, which resulted in the Crab Nebula. I'm sure you've seen these wonderful pictures by Hubble of the nebula that was produced by the explosion of the star. All the other reported observations just give dates. None of them have a building that is pointed toward the supernova. So I think this is nicely monumental in its importance. So here is a picture by Jensen of the upper and lower ventilator shaft. According to Frank's claim, he took a beam right out of this point at a very, very inaccessible area of the ruin of the Kiva, and Marcia feels that he took out a beam from the upper Kiva because I think he was digging downwards. We're not quite sure exactly how he did it, but if one reads the report that Frank wrote, there's really no indication that he made a special effort to dig deep enough to the lower ventilator shaft to get a beam from there. So we have, in a sense, two pieces of evidence that 1076 is not appropriate, namely the testimony of a graduate student who was there at that time, and a inspection of the thing itself, of the place itself, really indicates that he did not get the beam from the lowest part of the ruin. Again, the lowest part was built on bedrock, and then sometime later, the floor was irregular, which I suppose was not very aesthetic, and so they carried 6,000 pounds of soil from below up to the mesa, and it raised the level of the floor of the Great Kiva, of the East Kiva, up to this level, so that it could be nice and smooth and sufficiently pleasing to the gods. Next slide. So again, this is repeated what I said. She objected to the label when she describes this in great detail in her paper. The odd thing is she gave a paper at the conference. The papers at the conference were never published, but fortunately I was present. Steve Lexon was present also, so that there are other people who have heard her verbally, it's too bad the papers were never published. I published a paper. I gave a paper at that conference, which sort of shocked a lot of people. They said that Chimney Rock is not a Chaco outlier, it's a Salmon outlier in terms of the construction of the roof block, which was, the date on that is very clearly established at 1093. 1093 was a gap in the construction episodes occurring at Salmon. They were dates 1092 and 1095, but not 1093, so there were no masons at Salmon at the time that the room block was being built. And indeed, I'm sure you recognize, it's crazy to think that people would walk all the way out from Chimney Rock, walk past Salmon, and continue on to Chimney Rock to build a structure when Salmon was halfway. So again, Salmon, it's a Salmon outlier rather than a Chaco outlier. How's that? Oh, isn't that that's mad. Next slide, please. So here is a diagram of the yeshiva, and this is from Frank's book, from Frank's paper. He says in there in small letters that this is where the beam was taken, and he only partly excavated the kiva, but it excavated mostly with the idea of developing it for public visitation. Next slide. So take 1076 probably refers to the reconstruction of the kiva, making it more respectable with a good solid floor. And as I say, the date of original construction remains undetermined, but we can guess. Next slide. So here is a photograph by Gerard Gutierrez with very, very precise geo coordinates of the Great House, and here is the kiva, of course, and here is the line that, as I say, goes to the supernova, and this is the south wall. The north wall is tilted. I think you can tell that in the diagram, and the room block off to the north were all added in 1093. So it looks like we have two different kinds of astronomies present in the Great House. One, the supernova, and one, it's oriented toward June solstice sunrise, as I shall show you in a minute. Next slide. So, if any of you have been there at a time when you can at summer solstice be in the stone circle, you have discovered that the sunrise rises. The sunrise at summer solstice rises right exactly along the north wall of the Great House. This was taken when the fire tower was still present, and the sun was just working its way in between the narrow opening between the fire tower and the north wall. So the Great House combines summer solstice, the brightest object in the normal sky, and the supernova, the brightest object, or the bright object that appears out of nowhere, as it were, in 1054. Next slide. So here's the line going to the stone circle to the Great House. Next slide. Here is the stone circle, and as you know, the stone circle has a bedrock basin that used to be a destination for many tours, and according to guides that I talked to in the past, they would gather their customers around the basins and say, "What does this mean? Why did they make this beautiful basin? Cut this basin?" And some people suggest, well, it was filled with water, and maybe it was easier to see the sun's reflection than to look at the sun directly, which is a very nice idea. But anyhow, this is surrounded by a circle of stones that was very evident years ago. Now that circle of stones has been moved, but as many of you know, it's almost identical to stone circles in Chaco Canyon, especially in the north rim. If you go up above King Flexo and walk along the rim, you see a number of these stone circles with bedrock basins in them. Every one of those has a sight line to a great kiva, and this one has a sight line to a great kiva, which is nearby. So it's conceivable that some kinds of ceremonies involving the sun were practiced in these great kivas, and a way to observe the sun briefly was to observe it in the reflection of water off of the water that was in these basins. I don't know, that's a wild guess. But it's still, if you talk to an ophthalmologist, he says don't observe the sun reflected off of water. It's still dangerous. Next slide. So here again is the trapezoidal nature of the great house. Next slide. And here on the left are examples of great houses from Steve Lexon's book. None of them look as trapezoidal as on the right-hand side as the Chimney Rock great house with the two kivas. And again, it's quite easy when you look at it this way to see it's a combination of two different architectural plans. Next slide. So here is that. Now we'll get back to the gorilla, the 900-pound gorilla, the 1054 supernova. It was visible in the daytime skies for almost a month, for 23 days, and it continued in the night sky until April 1056, which is the year of the Major Standstill. So there really was an overlap between these two phenomena. We have this famous supernova pictograph in Chaco Canyon. You probably visited. There's a sign that says supernova. Some people don't like that at all, especially our friend Ed Krupp doesn't believe that it represents a supernova. But we have a star and a crescent moon, which is exactly the way the supernova appeared in July of 1054. And a hand. One shouldn't try to interpret rock art at all, but anyhow, it is consistent with what people were seeing in the sky at that time. I think the most telling interpretation in my mind is that we have beneath it this ring with flames going out to the right side. Maybe have any of you seen that pictograph? And it's 20 feet off the ground, and it really does look like a comet. The interpretation is that they already had memorialized the supernova on the wall, and where best to put a depiction of this Halley's comet in 1066. The same year as the Battle of Hastings, as you know. And there's an astronomical theory for why the Battle of Hastings turned out the way it did. It was that King Harold, who was a Saxon, believed that the comets were very dangerous and lost the war because this bad omen appeared in the sky. Yeah. Anyhow, that's an aside. Anyhow, next slide. So here is the view of the chimneys from the stone circle. They're not separated unless you stand way off on the right-hand side of the stone circle, and you can see a small crack. But anyhow, this is the fire. This is the fire tower when I made this diagram, and here is the supernova, and here are lines of the moon, the motion of the moon, the appearance of the moon. During these years, you can see that beginning 1051, the moon begins to be further north than I shouldn't say that, 10:52, the moon is further north than the solstice. And for anyone who is watching the skies, that is a abomination in a sense. The sun should be more powerful than the moon. And what is the moon doing? Something that the sun cannot do. And you can imagine this may have been a intellectual conundrum for many people. And then 10:52, 10:53, 10:54, the time of the supernova, the moon was rising behind the highest tower at that time, and then 10:56, here we had the maximum lunar standstill. So there was a connection between the moon and the supernova, and for people who were living up on Chimney Rock Mesa at that time, the eastern sky is just magnificent, as you can imagine, and this is something they could not have avoided seeing. And in fact, everyone living in that area could not have avoided seeing it under the clear skies of the southwest. Certainly those people in Chaco with Peñasco Blanco, for example, with a good sky, they saw it, and I think everyone was amazed. Next slide. So here's a detailed analysis of the East Kiva itself. The very accurate measurements that I've been able to obtain. Here is 68 degrees pointing towards the supernova, which is the southern wall of this enclosure of the Kiva. It's not just the southern wall that has this angle, but the line on which these ventilators, which are attached to the southern wall, is established again to the supernova. There is a fuel box or something like that that Frank Getty found that also aligns with that. On the other side, you can see two beam rests that are rotated from the other ones and more associated with the dashed line, which is the line to the summer solstice. Next slide. Let's go on. Next one. Oh, anyhow. It takes one doesn't need to explain to you that this sudden bright object in the sky, no one had ever experienced anything like that before, is powerful, perhaps as powerful and as significant as the sun and the moon, which controlled people's lives at that time, had some power over human beings. It was visible throughout the area, and so it's quite likely that there were no one living in Salmon at that time, in 54, that people really did get enlisted to come up from Chaco to build the walls of that isolated Kiva, the East Kiva. So the numbers are, if you use the sighting from the Stone Circle, the Crab Nebula, the remnant of that supernova, we know exactly where that is in the sky, and that is 68 degrees and 40 minutes. 68 degrees and 36 minutes is the orientation of that wall. There are some variations that are going to come, but anyhow, much closer orientation than normal that we find in astronomy. And one possibility is that it's not like the sun moving up to one place and moving away on cloudy A. This is an object that stayed still in its position in the sky for almost a year and a half. Next slide. So, the High Mesa would be the best place to observe the supernova. We know the supernova occurred. Next slide. So, when one looks at the connections between the moon and the supernova, it's very interesting in terms of what people would have seen. Next slide. This is a solarium diagram of the sky on July 5th, 1054. Here is the moon, our crescent moon, And here is a depiction of what the brightness, what the supernova may have looked like. So during that time, as the moon moved back and forth along the horizon and it's rising, it met up with the supernova a number of times. Next slide. So here is August 1st, again, the supernova and the moon. And in this depiction of the supernova is gradually getting fainter. Next slide. In late August, it's fainter yet. And next time the moon gets close to supernova, smaller supernova, brighter moon. And then the next one, December, the supernova has really shrunk. The moon is a full moon close to December solstice. You can imagine the kinds of speculations that are going on here in terms of the supernova is getting devoured by the moon. The moon is getting more powerful relative to the supernova during this period of time. Can you imagine what kind of theories people developed watching this going on in the sky? You know, their life is quite different from us, as you know. We watch TV at night. They watch the heavens at night. And if someone, all you need is one person in the group to say, "Oh, you can't believe what I saw last night," and everyone in the whole community is going to go out and look at the supernova. Next slide. So, there you go. This is what I said. It was easily marked. And I suggest at the end here is that there's somewhat puzzling fascination and interest amongst the ancestral problem in major lunar standstills is perhaps associated with its appearance with the supernova. You can imagine that perhaps they anticipated the next time a supernova could occur would be when the moon again returned to the position of the towers in 1076. They had prepared the kiva properly for that. They put a new floor on the kiva, and they maybe were expecting a return of the supernova. It didn't. They were disappointed, of course. Then 18 years later, we had another return of the moon and no supernovas. So there's a fascinating story, all very speculative, but very very possible, of this connection between the supernova and lunar standstills. And we have other examples, of course, of lunar standstills in Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon, which again may be the results of this experience with the supernova. Next slide. And I just can't, excuse me for going over, one of the next other good example of a lunar standstill is in Mesa Verde. As viewed from the Cliff Palace, the four-story square tower, there's a small room, and if you look from that room to the Sun Temple, you'll find an alignment to the standstill room. Next slide. Here is the Sun Temple, and in fact there's two sidelines, two astronomical objects in Mesa Verde. Erica and I are befuddled by the fact that the rangers in Mesa Verde are not really interested in astronomy. There was a period of time when I was active there that they seemed to be, but now Erica tells me in their new museum there's no discussion of the sky at all, and certainly not of the lunar standstill and the December solstice sunset as seen from Cliff Palace. It's interesting that it's overlooking the two circular rooms of the Sun Temple, and it's possible that this still is a remembrance of what was happening at Chimney Rock. Namely, these perhaps are the two rock pillars of Chimney Rock. Eventually, a very high wall was built, maybe 12 feet high, with no wall, no doorway in it, protecting what's inside. In the 1200s, when things were getting dangerous on the top of the Mesa at Mesa Verde, and it appears possible that what was going on inside was so important and so sacred that they built a high wall protecting the interior of the Sun Temple. Next slide. So here is a view from the inside of the square tower. There are 4 lines with tick marks on them, and they average out to be there's 70 tick marks, close to 18 per line, and it's conceivable that this is a unique pictograph, and maybe this is a record of the season of lunar standstills, 18.6 years per cycle. Next slide. Here is the alignment across the tower, across the Sun Temple, between the square tower and the moon. The moon being visible between these 2 round rooms, like the moon is visible between the 2 towers at Chimney Rock. Next slide. So here again is the discovery photograph. I should have at least made postcards or something like that to sell. But this, as I say, for 14 years, till our friend's photograph of it was the only picture of the lunar standstill. And the next slide, I think, is going to be of Kailash, a year before my observation. And here is the moon skirting the horizon behind the standing stones of Kailash. Very beautiful. But the most beautiful, next slide, the most beautiful picture of them all is the moon. They do this drawing before or after they finish drinking their beer. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have a short question to answer.
Yes.
So, Dr. Malville, if the 1054 date is correct at Chimney Rock, there's not much going on in Chaco then. So, I mean, the Chaco efflorescence is I don't know. I mean, you really got to look at that date back in Chaco. Can you explain that a little more?
Well, that's not a time, well, that's the time that Central Kettle was built, I
Right.
think. But you're right, 1076 was a period of more activity,
Right.
especially 1090 was more evidence of movement out of Chaco, so nothing much going on. But we do have a photograph from Penasco Blanco of Casarin Canada with the major lunar standstill on top of it. Either that's a coincidence, and I think traditional societies consider there's no such thing as coincidences. And so it's possible that Casarin Canada was located following the 1056 major lunar standstill. I think dates for Casarin Canada are probably in 1060 or something like that. And so this would precede the construction of Casarin Canada. Our friend over here, Ron, has developed a very detailed study of Casarin Canada and shows that there are sight lines from niches to both the southern and northern major lunar standstill. And another friend, Cheryl Lynn, has shown that the moon rises above the major lunar standstill. Moon rises above a prominent notch on the horizon above Casarin Canada. So 1056 was the major lunar standstill following the supernova, and that 1070 that may have stimulated people. It takes time to build a great kiva. So maybe that's what happened. Maybe that's the connection. You probably heard Ron talk about this. Any other questions?
How
Yes.
long did it take to build a room?
Oh, golly, I have no idea. That's a bit of experimental archaeology that one should be engaged in, but depends how many people there are and how much energy is needed to shape the stones and things like that. I'm not sure. The stones obviously were brought from below. There isn't very much on the upper mesa, either soil-wise or rock-wise. So that there was, they had to carry water up there. It would have been a difficult job building the greenhouse up there. I don't know how long. If only we had more dendrochronology of the site, we would know much more. Okay, well, thank you, and thank you again for participating in this.